Okay, so Game Science has updated Black Myth Wukong with a new update, patch number 1.0.20.21756, according to Oliver, bringing with it a whole bunch of changes, potential improvements, and there was a kind of warning in advance that the PlayStation 5 version would come in at like 93 gigabytes or something. Suggests that a lot has changed. Oliver, you've looked at this. I'm curious what you think about these changes, because we looked at some of the patch notes, and I think I filed it under things that make you go,
Yes. I think the key concern here comes down to this language in the patch notes, which it says, adjusted performance mode back to 60 hertz, reducing input latency and achieving higher resolution than before. However, the lighting quality has been adjusted to enhance performance. So that was...
okay, I think I know where that's going.
Yeah, that was a concern of ours. So the basic story here is that if you've seen our Xbox coverage of Black Myth Wukong from August, it is the same story. So the performance mode now does not feature lumen lighting, lumen GI at all. So you have much worse indirect lighting detail. Most of it is missing. It does not look very flattering. It's a massive visual downgrade, in my opinion. It's really not very pleasing at all. And there's some other visual cutbacks in the mix, like low resolution shadows, but that is by far the biggest difference, in my opinion. But we still have a legacy performance mode that kept around the legacy performance mode on PlayStation 5. So we can go back to the old visuals if we like. But of course there, we're talking about frame generation. We're talking about relatively low internal resolutions. But we are talking about lumen as well. So we do have that lumen presentation, which makes the game kind of look like it should. You know, when you compare the game across PC and console, I think with that old performance mode, even though the input response is not great, even though the animation doesn't look super fluid at times, it does look like Black Myth Wukong is supposed to look, so that's satisfying. Now, I did go over to Series X as well. Series X is interesting. It does not seem to be changed too much. Now, I did not do any exhaustive testing, but from my initial impressions, did not seem too different from where it was in August, and certainly Game Science didn't suggest any major changes to the Series X version. But it does not have the legacy performance mode, so they didn't add the legacy performance mode to Series X. I tested PS5 Pro. It gets both the legacy performance mode and the new performance mode, but they're running with similar visual settings to PS5. So just like before, the balanced and quality modes on PS5 Pro are better than PS5. So they're better modes, better image quality, look better, run a little bit better. Great modes in my opinion, or at least, you know, by the standards of this game, they're pretty great modes for console. But the performance modes are the same as PS5. So why is that? It's hard to explain. It certainly does not seem very explicable in my opinion. Finally, they have two other changes here. So first of all, they mentioned better performance in the patch notes. Specifically, they say they improved CPU and rendering performance in numerous scenarios. So it seemed kind of open-ended. I figured why not give that a bit of a try in the opening scene, because the opening scene in performance mode on PlayStation 5 consoles runs unlocked. It runs without frame generation. It's a pretty good benchmark. Rich uses it all the time. So I tested that out with a comparison with the old version of the game and the new version of the game. And the new version seems to run about the same. In some sections, it's like 1 or 2 FPS lower. In others, it's like, 2 FPS, 3 FPS higher. So to me, that kind of seems like a bit of a wash. Again, that's just one data point. I'm sure if I tested performance throughout the entire game, maybe I'd come up with different conclusions, or perhaps not, because the game really, in performance mode and a number of other modes, it tends to only really struggle at like certain loading thresholds and things like this. It tends to be a pretty much locked frame rate experience at the moment. On PlayStation consoles, it tends to be pretty steady, at least if you're not doing balanced mode at like 45 FPS or anything ridiculous like that, which is not a pleasant experience no matter how you slice it. But anyways, I digress. There's also a note about improving the game's loading speed, and that's specifically penciled in as a PS5 improvement. So the initial load, I looked at my footage from the old patch from August, and the initial load was 18.69 seconds into the game, fresh game, new load. Now it's 17.95 seconds. So slightly faster load there, a little bit under a second improvement there.
Okay.
So that's good. Now, I think the kind of central issue with this update and the promulgation of that Xbox performance mode to PS5 consoles, to PS5 Pro consoles, is the fact that Rich was able last year, as I keep bringing up as in constant Black Myth Wukong coverage, he was able to get the game running on a PS5 spec PC, literally like the PS5's APU plus an RX 6700, I think. He was able to get that running at 60 FPS at 1080p output with high settings, I think using FSR in quality mode, or TSR in quality mode rather, I think.
Yeah.
So that seems like a better way to go, because you're keeping the lighting detail, you're running it at a true 60 FPS. That seems like the better route there. Even if image quality would take a little bit of a hit, I always feel like I prefer the softer looking game that retains, good looking lighting, compared to like a sharper looking game that has lighting that seems more reminiscent of a last generation game, or even a 7th generation game in many respects. Does not look very appealing.
Really? Yeah.
So because that's how the game does look like without Lumen. They don't have a good baked GI fallback to go back to. It looks very primitive. So I'm a little befuddled and confused by this update. On the one hand, I guess it's good they homogenized the modes a little bit with bringing the Xbox Perf mode to PS5, which, even though I don't like it, but at the same time, it feels like they didn't bring the Xbox, rather they didn't bring the PlayStation 5 legacy performance mode to Xbox. So it kind of feels like, what are we doing here? What are we trying to accomplish here? It's a very unequal configuration, and it's just weird. It's like every kind of set of conventions, and I mentioned this in earlier coverage, but every kind of set of console game configuration conventions between performance modes, between consoles, it seems like game science is not really adopting, or is adopting in very haphazard ways. There have been some improvements since launch. We do have a 40 hertz balance mode. We do have the PS5 Pro improvements. But I feel like these Xbox performance modes, these Xbox Series X performance modes that are now on PlayStation 5 and PS5 Pro, it's just not the right way to go with this title. But I also felt like the old performance mode wasn't the right way to go with this title. The only modes I'm really happy with at the moment are the balance modes and quality modes. But obviously this game benefits very much from 60 FPS, so I'd prefer it if they could introduce a performance mode that is up to the general quality bar that I think gamers expect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just can't get over the fact they removed Lumen, and the original game was arted up with Lumen in mind, right? So this isn't what I consider to be the developer's actual plan for the game. It looks odd. It looks bad. And at the same time, frame generation, it's I was reading some actual user comments on Reddit about the patch, and there seemed to be some sort of positive reaction to the performance mode, in that people can actually tell the difference in terms of input lag. As well they might, because the previous performance mode was frame generation up to 60 frames per second, which automatically pegs the game internally at 30 frames per second, buffering a frame as well. So that's not going to be particularly great, but I'm sure there must have been a better way there. Something else that was in the notes I noticed, Oliver, was I think one of our original critiques of Black Myth Wukong on PlayStation 5 was that bafflingly it was using lower quality textures, and they've made some notes there about having improved texture quality as well. This is just a kind of weird game. Continues to be weird, continues to be sort of baffling decisions being made about its technical makeup on consoles. I'm curious what you think about that, Alex.
I mean, I was also a little bit confused when it launched on PC in some ways. Like they had that bizarre forced sharpening for the entire game.
Yes,
that was like set to like 1 million. The game looked just incredibly crunchy, and like I'm pretty sure anyone who's been playing games for a long time would be like, maybe we should make that optional, but it just never was. And I always feel like at points like this, I wish we had the ability to have a direct line with the developer and have responsive feedback, because I think we could, especially at launch on the PS5 version, long before launch, we probably could have told them maybe that 45 FPS target or whatever you're doing is not the best idea. Things like that. And I feel like this is another case example of it, where they're kind of getting some of the feedback, but it's still not exactly right. I do think it is possible to ship a 60 FPS Lumen title, even with their more ancient version of the engine, just with much lower image quality. I think that should be doable, actually, based upon the GPUs.
Yeah, the CPU overhead. Yeah, the CPU overhead seemed to be quite low on the PC version, but who knows at this point? Yeah, because there's a lot of sort of weird decisions that were made, and you've got to kind of assume that they were made for a reason. Maybe we're just not privy to some of the reasons. That could well be the case. Final thoughts, Oliver?
Not too many at the moment. I'm happiest with this game in its balance mode probably on the consoles, because I feel like that's a good trade-off between image quality and performance. But again, this is an action game. It's a little bit on the tougher side in many areas. I feel like that 60 FPS is so critical, and indeed in a lot of other games, a lot of other action games that we see on the consoles now. And I mean, just games in general, 60 FPS is such a common target. It's like the default. Not having a good 60 FPS mode in this game is just a real... it just really does not feel good. And I feel like it's... The frustrating thing is, like, I think this is probably overcomeable is the problem here. It's like this is not a game that is pushing up against the limits of low-end hardware in the same way that a title like Metal Gear Solid Delta is, right? Where it's just never going to run properly. So it is frustrating. Hopefully they can do something about it. I'm not optimistic about it, but maybe they can take some of these lessons for their next title, their next Black Myth game. Maybe they can have some improvements there.